Good evening. I wish I could say it really was a good evening, but film fans around the globe are mourning the loss of legitimately one of the greatest actors who ever worked in the medium. Gene Hackman, who recently celebrated his 95th birthday, passed away at some time yesterday under circumstances that the police, not trying to start up shit, but they said it was suspicious, and they're trying to figure out, was it a carbon monoxide situation? Was it a gas leak? It doesn't appear that there was a quarrel or a forced entry. It is strange that Gene and his wife had both passed, and one of the dogs, but other dogs were okay, and there was a dog that was fine in the room with Gene's wife. So the whole thing is strange, but regardless of the circumstances, regardless of what ends up turning in the investigation, because I'm sure we will get some concrete answers, but the world has lost one of the greatest actors who ever lived. Somebody who couldn't help but have effortless charisma, whether he played heroes or villains, or somewhere in between, as he did so brilliantly for so many years. And I would say that, his first sort of great film performance, Bonnie and Clyde, a movie that's more famous because of Warren Beatty in the lead, and how the film seemed to be disappointing at first, and then Warren Beatty campaigned and pushed the film to get another crack, and he was kind of instrumental in almost jump-starting the sort of auteur movement in the 1970s. Filmmakers such as Arthur Penn and Stanley Kubrick and Robert Altman and great filmmakers such as that would have a higher level of creative control. William Friedkin being another, who famously worked with Gene in Gene's first Oscar win in The French Connection. But from 1967 through 2003, that is 36 years, bookended, in my opinion, just my opinion, by two extraordinary Gene Hackman performances, that he was capable at that wide range of an age or of ages to give entirely different but no less distinctive, memorable performances. He was Oscar nominated for Bonnie and Clyde. It really jump-started his career as a leading man. I always talk about it, the unconventional leading men of the 70s, such as Gene and Roy Scheider and Charles Bronson and Dustin Hoffman. Yes, you had Warren Beatty and Clint and Robert Redford, but you also had actors who looked like regular, normal, attractive people, but 7 or 8 out of 10, not 10 out of 10 in the case of Redford or Beatty, for example. But Hackman's last electrifying performance, I don't use that word lightly, is in a film which is pretty good. It's not great. It's an unconventional adaptation of John Grisham's huge bestseller. I mean, Grisham just knocked out one big bestseller after another. They were all great reads from A Time to Kill forward. But it was an adaptation of Runaway Jury. And it's notable within the world of the film for the pairing of two old pals in the aforementioned Dustin Hoffman and Gene. And it's the sort of role that, for both guys, but Gene in particular, it's the sort of role where he could have played the kind of character in his sleep. He plays a jury consultant, a real nasty, vicious jury consultant. It's almost like, if we go back, the President of the United States, Alan Richmond, that he plays in Absolute Power, this would be that guy. Let's say that he survives the events of the film and somehow doesn't get into trouble. It's the same kind of almost unrepentant, proud piece of shit that he doesn't care that everyone knows he's a fucking asshole. He's just going to do his thing. And in the world of the movie Runaway Jury, he's getting paid a lot of money to pick the perfect jury for the gun and ammunition industry, because they're getting sued and they don't want any jurors that might be, or who might be, sympathetic to the prosecution's case. And he has a moment. There is a moment in the film which now takes on a different meaning because Gene is gone, where he and Dustin Hoffman, who plays the plaintiff's attorney, and it's a really good performance by Dustin, who also was not coasting on, the kind of brand name of being Dustin Hoffman, where Dustin really digs deep in that film, as I feel he also does in Stranger Than Fiction. It's one of his best performances after the 90s. But there's a moment in this film where Gene Hackman's Rankin Fitch, that's a great name for a villain, Rankin Fitch. But Gene Hackman's Rankin Fitch basically happens to be using the men's room at the same time as Dustin Hoffman's kind of old school homespun attorney who seems like he's not paying attention, but he actually is. He's a really good lawyer, but he puts forth an image that he's almost this sort of doddering old man, even though he's not. And these two old pros, these two multiple Oscar winners, brilliant actors who went back to the mid-60s before either of them hit the big time, they have what amounts to a verbal duel where each guy thinks that he's getting the better of the other. And it is, to use a phrase from a Jack Nicholson film, it is as good as it gets to see two masters both playing really interesting roles and taking them as far as they can go. And each guy thinks the other is fucking moron. Not intellectually, but in every other way. And it's a performance by Gene that's so powerful. Could have gotten a Best Supporting Actor nomination, just like he had won 11 years earlier for his role as Sheriff, Little Bill Daggett in Unforgiven. But Hackman had an authenticity that can't be taught. He had a naturalistic way of reading lines where it didn't feel as if he was reading lines. It felt as if he was coming up with the words in real time. Now, I don't know if he studied the method, because the Stanislavski, the method, like with Brando and some of the other actors who did it, De Niro, there's that funny clip from the shooting of Casino where you hear Martin Scorsese, although, 30 years ago, giggling away because De Niro is using the method for a scene with the comedian. It's funny, I can't remember his name, Hockey Pucksolia. But he's doing the scene with the comedian who is an insult comic, Don Rickles. Man, that's embarrassing. I almost forgot the name. But he's doing a scene and he's hesitating in such a way, and Rickles he's kind of joking, but I think he was legitimately mad, and Rickles really lets him have it for using the method. He's like, Bob, read the fucking lines. And you hear Scorsese screaming in the background. He's laughing so hard. And even De Niro, who's not known as necessarily, you really are a funny guy. He's not known to kind of break down during filming, but Rickles got him so good that they had to keep running the takes because he couldn't stop laughing. It's really great stuff. But Hackman, it seemed as if he was using the method when he wasn't. It felt as if he was coming up with the lines on the spot, and he was not simply memorizing, and this is how he chooses to dispense his lines. He was just a great actor. And I remember Roger Ebert, when he was discussing probably the worst movie that Gene ever made, Loose Cannons, this terrible pseudo-comedy is what Gene called it, because to call it a comedy is an insult to a real comedy. But it was a pseudo-comedy co-starring Dom DeLuise, of all people. Dan Aykroyd plays pretty much a guy who seems like an escaped lunatic, and somehow he's Gene Hackman's partner. Gene plays like a tough cop, and we know he's a tough cop because he's a fan of the Washington football team, I guess. That's supposed to mean because he's a football fan, he's a tough cop. It's so ridiculous. And Dom DeLuise plays this producer, like a movie producer, who has a porno film with Adolf Hitler. The film is in such horrendous taste. It's so bad. Everybody embarrasses themselves except Gene. Gene is still up there fighting and scratching and clawing to make his character feel like a real person and not just a stereotyped tough cop. And Roger, in his review, said, Gene's the only one who comes out of this unscathed because he just doesn't miss. And if you ask me what are his best performances, or to look at it another way, because there are people under 30, Gene's been retired. He retired after Welcome to Mooseport, a comedy that was not really that good with Ray Romano, who was pretty hot at the time, the TV show that he did, which was very successful, Everybody Loves Raymond. But Gene has been gone from the film business. He went the way of his pal, Sean Connery, who also retired in his early 70s. Sir Sean, the late great, was also born in 1930. And he retired after League of Extraordinary Gentlemen at age 72. So Gene was like 73 when he shot his final film. And then he ended up, he wrote books, and he didn't exactly disappear from life. He was still riding bikes into his 90s and, mingling with fans and stuff. And he seemed like a really likable guy. He bought this incredible ranch, kind of a farm/ranch in New Mexico in the late 80s. And that's where he lived when he wasn't working for the rest of his life. And the place was so incredible when he was making Enemy of the State with Will Smith in, circa 1997. One of the locations where they were filming was pretty close to where Gene's home was. And he asked his co-star, would you like to, we'd have an evening, whatever he said to him. He said, would you like to, kind of see my house and maybe we'll hang out, or whatever he says to him. And Will was so impressed with the house. He couldn't believe what it looked like. It looked even better up close than it had pictures. And the same person who designed Gene's house, Will used to design his own mansion that he, I guess, was working on at the time. I mean, that's neither here nor there, but he was very gracious. But you could look at different films and you can see that it's the same actor. The vocal inflections, he had a way that he could change the speaking pattern. And even within the context of playing good guys, bad guys, or in between, he didn't just give the same kind of performance. So if I'm asked, if a young person who is a movie fan, okay, I saw him in Superman, and I thought he was funny with Keanu in The Replacements, which was you start to, when you really feel your age, yeah, my dad was a big fan of that film with Keanu, whatever the case might be. The best Gene Hackman, if you ask me what is his single best performance, it's Francis Coppola's The Conversation. He plays a wiretapper at a time where actual old school analog wiretapping was the only way to do it, where you actually had to bug somebody and you had to match sound and do all kinds of stuff, which now, well, this is fucking stupid. There are apps that do this. Yeah, no shit. But in the early to mid 1970s, there weren't any apps. Everything had to be done on the ground. And Gene, in the movie The Conversation, which is the film that Francis Coppola, who posted a very nice tribute and a picture of the two of them on the set of The Conversation, he made the movie in between the two Godfather films, or the first two, I should say. And Gene plays a wiretapper named Harry Call, who is exceedingly paranoid. The irony is, maybe he has reason to be paranoid, or maybe just the business that he's in, where people can sometimes get hurt or killed because of work that he does, because he's the best there is. He is the best. If he's the kind of guy where in 1973, you need to record a conversation between two random people in the most crowded section of Central Park in New York City, let's just say, for instance, he knows how to do it. He knows how to send and have people with wires and have boom mics positioned at exact, precise locations where he will be able to isolate the sound of two random people talking in the middle of Central Park with thousands of people in their midst. That is how good this guy is. And Gene gets everything right. There are those who would say it's one of the great film performances, period. Forget the best performance by Gene. It's one of the great performances ever given in a motion picture. That it's up there with, Bobby D in Taxi Driver. It's up there with that level of technical genius and proficiency. If you want to throw Dustin Hoffman as Raymond Babbitt from a craftsmanship standpoint, that's a stupendous bit of film acting. But if The Conversation is his best pure acting job, where this character does not feel like a movie character, this feels like a real guy going through these terrible events, which, well, maybe they're actually not terrible. Maybe Harry Call has things completely backwards. He thinks that the story is one thing, but the story is actually something else. The Conversation does not feel like a slow burn mystery thriller, but it kind of is. It doesn't feel like a mindfuck movie, but it kind of is. And his performance is exemplary, and it's some of Coppola's best film directing too. The way that he chooses to stage certain scenes. He takes some chances that you're not expecting. Just a marvelous film that I always recommend. But as long as you go into it, it's not an up-tempo thriller. It is a slow burn kind of film. It's as much a character study as it is a mystery or a thriller or a suspense film. And I mentioned the movie that he did with Will Smith, Enemy of the State, which came out as a huge hit and is very well remembered by history. It predicted a lot of, the geo-positioning and GPS itself and what happens when Big Brother is watching us 100% of the time. This movie gets into that, and the film was conceived in 96. Will was actually not targeted for this role. It was written for an older actor, a la a Mel Gibson, a Kevin Costner, possibly a Stallone or an Arnold, but they ended up changing it to suit Will Smith. They're having the guy, Robert Clayton Dean, who is a Harvard graduate, they made him younger. I feel like for the era, either Mel or Kevin Costner, possibly Bruce Willis, but I feel like Mel or Costner would have been better suited to this particular guy with the kind of line readings, especially Mel, with the very lucid way that he, Mel could play intellectual. We saw it. And he played a lot of characters who were bruisers who happened to be very intelligent. But Will is really good in that film. But the fan theory that I was getting to is that Gene's character in Enemy of the State, who is a surveillance expert, is the character from The Conversation 25 years later. And he wears the same glasses in Enemy of the State that he wears in The Conversation, which I think is not an accident. I mean, come on. And then there is like security footage, or there are shots of him when John Voight's character is saying, what's the story with this guy? The shots are from the movie The Conversation. So like Tony Scott knew exactly what he was doing. He was setting it up so film geeks like me would get excited and say, holy shit, this is like an unofficial sequel. And Gene is basically playing the same guy, living under an assumed name and a new identity. Hackman's Oscars, I don't know that he should have gotten the Oscar for The French Connection. If I'm asked the question, what actor gave the best performance in a movie in a leading role in 1971, my first choice is Malcolm McDowell in A Clockwork Orange. That is another of cinema's all-time greatest pieces of film acting. Malcolm McDowell should have won Best Actor. The problem is A Clockwork Orange was an extremely, and is still 54 years later, an extremely polarizing and kind of difficult, problematic movie. And I got to be honest with you, Gene Hackman has a lot more acting range than Clint Eastwood, but I think that Clint in Dirty Harry had just as much of a claim. If we're gonna nominate a cop thriller and a Best Actor, I love what Clint does in Dirty Harry. He gives you just enough of the interior life of Harry Callahan. He gives you just enough where we get what makes this guy tick, and he comes across as a bit of a sad sack, even though the performance is not a sad sack performance. It's just, it might be Clint's best performance, maybe that and In the Line of Fire 1 and 1A. But there is no quarrel with Gene's Oscar for Unforgiven, because he is extraordinary in that film. And that is a character that, under different circumstances, would not be the villain of the piece. And that's why the nuance, especially in a movie like Unforgiven, is important to talk about. Because, for example, Gene plays a very similar character 3 years later in Sam Raimi's pretty good, unbelievable cast, The Quick and the Dead. In addition to Gene, you have Sharon Stone, nominally the lead, Leonardo DiCaprio, Lance Henriksen, Keith David. It is an unbelievable cast. Now, Gene in that movie is an out-and-out bad guy. He's a man named Herod who pretty much runs the town. And he is way worse than Little Bill Daggett of Unforgiven. And the way that I see it, under different circumstances, Little Bill Daggett would come across just like a regular sheriff. Okay, he doesn't want there to be any guns in town. He just is looking to uphold the law. But in the world of Unforgiven, events take place that show how twisted he is, or how twisted his sense of justice is, might be a more accurate statement. Because some of the things that his character does, for example, to the Sir Richard Harris, another incredible fucking actor, what a monster performer he was. The original Albus Dumbledore, just for reference. But the scenes with Sir Richard Harris, sometimes you can kind of identify why Little Bill is so angry. And pointing out to the Saul Rubinek character, who is the biographer of English Bob, the Richard Harris character, why you should not idolize this guy. He just kind of got lucky in a couple of gunfights. He's nothing special. But he has warped views of crime and punishment and truth and justice. And Hackman is, you can't do it any better. You just can't do it any better. And that was to say it was well-deserved is to not even do justice to it. That is certainly his best supporting performance. And I would say that his best lead performance is For the Conversation. And we don't really know why people choose to continue to work when they don't have to. Like Harrison Ford joking around, he said, "What are your current goals?" He said, "I want to stop working," as if he doesn't have enough money to stop working. Although he didn't say that, we're just kind of editorializing. But, Gene didn't need it. There was a part of him, he wanted to write some books, and he had teased way back when, Silence of the Lambs, he was going to get involved. Well, he was involved, and he wanted to write the screenplay. He wanted to actually adapt Thomas Harris's book, and he was going to play Hannibal Lecter. I know that seems insane now, but this is true. You can Google this. But he couldn't do it, and he was so frustrated trying to turn Thomas Harris's very dense novel into a screenplay that he didn't simply say, "You know what, I can't do the script, get somebody else," but he left the project entirely. But he just reached a point where I guess he didn't want to sit in a makeup trailer for hours a day, or sit in a trailer in general for hours a day. He wanted to retire to his farm and spend time with his wife, as we know, was a lot younger than him. She was in her early 40s when he, stepped away from acting. But I think of how galvanizing he was as Lex Luthor. Even though a lot of comic book purists would say that he didn't really have the right handle on the character or the right take on the character, well, that would be more the filmmaker Richard Donner. I love Gene's Lex Luthor. He's incredible in the first one, but I would say he's even better in the second one, because the second one, his character doesn't appear to be needed. It doesn't seem that Lex Luthor is an important component because you have the 3 Kryptonian supervillains and 1 Superman. Why do you need an earthbound, normal person supervillain when you have these bad guys? And you go all the way to the end of the movie before you realize, holy shit, that's why this movie needed Lex Luthor. Fucking brilliant. And Gene pulls it off. He is so good in that film. And Superman 4 is just disastrously bad. He's the only good thing in the movie. I don't even like Christopher Reeve's performance in that film, and I'm like the biggest Christopher Reeve fan in history. That film was it was doomed from the setup and from the concept. When the Salkin sold the property and the Cannon Group, Menachem Golan and Yoram Globus took it over, that needed to be a bigger budget than it was. It was just not good, and it's unfortunate. Now, the movie Hoosiers is a film that I like a lot. There are those, and you might be among them, and this is not a judgment. You know that on the Planet Fitness of podcasts here, this is a judgment-free zone. I know plenty of people, if I ask the question, what is your single favorite sports movie? The answer they give, some people say Rudy, but many people say Hoosiers. Same filmmaker is where I was going with that comparison, David Anspaugh. I really like Hoosiers. It's not in my top 5. I don't know that it's even in my top 10, despite the fact, you asked me how many times have I seen it beginning to end? I've probably seen it 6 or 7 times. The interesting thing for me on a personal note is that in 1986, the late, great Dennis Hopper was in 3 big movies and gave distinctive, really, really solid performances in all 3. Blue Velvet, River's Edge, also with Keanu, who he later, co-starred in Speed, and Hoosiers. He was nominated for supporting actor, didn't win, but he was nominated for Hoosiers. The Academy fucked up. He should have been nominated for supporting for Blue Velvet, and I believe he would have won. Because Dennis Hopper in Blue Velvet, that is a top 5 greatest supporting performances, certainly that I have ever seen, that anybody has ever seen. Don't you fucking look at me! Where's my bourbon, you shithead? But yeah, Hoosiers, a great film. And you just look at the quality of his work throughout the 90s, even starting with kind of trifles. The thriller, for example, he did with Ann Archer, Narrow Margin, a really interesting casting, that a terrific actor. He played Doogie Howser's dad in Doogie Howser MB, James B. Sicking, who kind of plays the big bad in Narrow Margin, and Gene just plays an attorney who's trying to transport a witness. And it's one of those where Gene looks like he could take James B. Sicking and stuff him into a garbage can. The problem is that the bad guy is a trained killer and Gene is simply an attorney. That's not a great movie, but it's super entertaining. And not surprisingly, Gene Hackman sells it. And Ann Archer, an actor who, had a good run. She was the wife in Fatal Attraction. She's pretty good. And he did a film with Mary Elizabeth, I think it was Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, in 91 called Class Action. It's not really that good of a movie, but the film took full advantage of Gene's ability to impart menace. How he could just come across like he was going to break every bone in your body with a glare and with a particular line reading. And what I remember is the movie Class Action is not a thriller. It's kind of like a medical malpractice sort of story, but I remember the trailer. There's a moment in the trailer, and they tried to make it seem like the film was a thriller. Okay? At the end of the trailer, I guess the twist is that Gene Hackman and Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio are father and daughter who are kind of estranged. They're kind of on the outs, and they're on opposing sides of a huge class action lawsuit. But the trailer ends with Gene Hackman, in as only he can, in the most menacing, intimidating way, saying to a character, "If you ever so much look at my daughter again, they won't be able to identify you through dental records." And that's how the trailer ended. So I knew a guy, an old friend of mine, Jeff, from Massapequa High School. He went to see the movie that weekend, the opening weekend, I think on the strength of the trailer and Gene's incredible threat. And he said, that happens at the end of the movie. Spoiler alert. It's not as big a deal as you think it is in the trailer. It really has nothing to do with the film at all. But that's, you know what? You got to try to get fannies in seats, and you have to try to take advantage when you have a live wire like Gene Hackman. Trying to think of what other movies of his, that I love. I'm supposed to really like, I saw Royal Tenenbaums in theaters, and Wes Anderson is a genius, but some of his movies just sort of leave me cold. I like the Royal Tenenbaums. I don't love it. I thought Gene's performance was good, but there were people expecting a Best Actor nomination. I don't know. I really like what Ben Stiller did there. I like Luke Wilson, an actor that can kind of go hot and cold. I thought Gwyneth was really good. The movie just didn't quite hit for me, and Gene's performance, it didn't land the way that it should have. I don't know why. I also wasn't a huge fan of his movie Rushmore. It's, neither here nor there. I didn't love The Replacements. As I said, a lot of people did. The movie that he made also kind of towards the end of his career, Heartbreakers, with Jennifer Love Hewitt and Sigourney Weaver and Ray Liotta, speaking of late great. Didn't love that one. But he just never gave a bad performance. You look at in 95, Crimson Tide with Denzel, it's good on Denzel to be able to hold his own with Gene, who was just all fire and brimstone. That's a film, a nuclear submarine kind of movie, in the similar ballpark to Hunt for Red October 5 years earlier. I don't love his performance in The Firm opposite Tom Cruise. It's crazy to think that he was miscast, but I feel like he kind of was. And he's not in the credits. That's something, if you're interested, it's like dumb. He went unbilled in The Firm. His name does not appear on a poster, nothing. And I think that it was a marketing situation where he had in his contract that his name would be above the titles for any movie that he was in, or at least beside the titles, if you will, and that was going to be Tom Cruise above the titles. So Gene's agent said, "All right, no big deal. Just don't have him in the credits," and he wasn't in the credits. I didn't buy the character. Avery Tolar was the name of the character, and the flirtation with Tom Cruise's character, the wife, the Jeanne Tripplehorn character. I just didn't think the character worked. I like that movie. It's not as good as the book. Stop me if you've heard that before. It's not as good as the book, but I like the movie. I just think that Gene was the wrong choice for that particular part. And it's like the only movie of his where I would ever or have ever said, I don't think he was the right actor for the part, because he was so good, he could make it work anyway. And I don't want to sound like a wimp here, but when I saw the story and I started clicking, I really was emotional. I understand, and there are some people that would maybe take issue with even film geeks, and they'd say, no, it's okay that this guy has been a lifelong movie fan, but maybe you don't like that I get emotional when somebody I've never met, never was going to meet in all likelihood, it hurts when they pass. And Gene Hackman's passing, although he lived an incredible full life, got about as much out of life as any of us could ever hope to. I am still sad, but what an extraordinary legacy of incredible work across 36 to 40 years of cinema. Rest in peace to the one and only Gene Hackman. This has been episode 454 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for joining me for this kind of somber and depressing Gene Hackman retrospective episode. But if you check out this one on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Until then,